At 9:17 on the morning of January 22, 1943, Second Lieutenant John George huddled in the wreckage of a Japanese fortification west of Point Cruz, peering at a massive banyan tree 240 yards distant through a sight his comrades had ridiculed for 6 weeks. 27 years old, champion marksman from Illinois, no enemies downed yet. The enemy forces had 11 sharpshooters active in the Point Cruz thickets, and over the last 72 hours, they had taken out 14 soldiers from the 132nd Infantry Regiment. His superior had dismissed his firearm as a plaything. Fellow unit heads joked it was his catalog romance. When he unwrapped the Winchester Model 70 with its Lyman Alaskan optic and Griffin and Howe base, at Camp Forest in Tennessee, the weapons expert asked if it was for hunting game or foes from Europe. George clarified it was aimed at the adversaries from Asia. They departed before the gun reached him. George passed the trip to Guadalcanal, seeing others maintain their garons as his own tool waited in storage back in Illinois. He asked for it to be sent via Army Post. 6 weeks on, in late December 1942, a logistics sergeant delivered a wooden box labeled Delicate. Within lay the gun he had scrimped 2 years of reserve duty earnings to purchase. The firearm tipped the scales at 9 pounds. The optic tacked on 12 ounces. The standard issue for his comrades weighed 9.5 pounds without any zoom. George's piece used a manual bolt with 5 cartridges. The Garand fired automatically with 8. Captain Morris commanded him to stash the leisure gun in his shelter and use a proper one. George took it along regardless. The 132nd Infantry took over from the Marines on Guadalcanal in late December 1942. The Marines had battled since August. They secured Henderson Field. They defended it but failed to seize Mount Austin or drive out the foes from the shore groves west of the Matanikau River. Mount Austin rose 1,514 feet high. The adversaries named it the Jimu, with 500 troops in 47 strongholds. George's group assaulted on December 17th. They clashed for 16 days. They suffered 34 dead and 279 injured before claiming the western side on January 2nd. By that point, George had pulled the trigger on his Winchester 0 times in battle. The wilderness near Point Cruz differed. No forts, no set defenses, just enemy fighters who fled west from Henderson Field and burrowed into huge trees. Some were expert marksmen. They wielded scoped Arasaka Type 97s. They mastered the wilds. They excelled at patience. On January 19th, a marksman downed Corporal Davis as he refilled water flasks at a stream. On January 20th, another claimed 2 from L Company on scout duty. On January 21st, 3 more perished. One took a hit through the throat from a perch the group had bypassed twice. The group leader called George that evening. The enemy sharpshooters were dropping his troops quicker than disease. He required a skilled shooter. He questioned if that posted gun could strike true. George shared his background. Illinois state title at 1,000 yards in 1939. 23, then the youngest victor ever in the state. 6-inch clusters at 600 yards using basic sights. With the Lyman Alaskan, 5 hits inside 4 inches at 300 yards. The leader granted him till dawn to demonstrate. If you are eager to learn how George's everyday gun fared against foes honed for forest combat, kindly tap that thumbs up. It aids in spreading more overlooked tales like this. And kindly join if you have not yet. Returning to George. George passed the night inspecting his firearm. The Winchester arrived coated in preservative for the sea journey. He wiped it fresh. He verified the optic fittings. He inserted 5 cartridges of .306 sporting loads he brought from Tennessee. Standard Army bullets, identical to what the Garand used. At first light on January 22nd, George shifted to a spot in the ruins of an enemy fort his group had seized 3 days prior. The spot gazed over the palm thickets west of Point Cruz. Reports indicated enemy sharpshooters hid in the big trees there, banyan giants. Some towered 90 feet, with stems 8 feet wide. A marksman could scale one at dusk and perch all day unseen. George came without an observer or communicator, just his gun, a water flask, and 60 cartridges in loaders. He nestled in and started scanning the trees via his optic. The Lyman Alaskan offered 2.5 times enlargement. Modest, but sufficient to catch shifts the bare eye overlooked. The wilds never hushed. Birds, bugs, far-off booms. George had trained to ignore distractions and zero in on motion. He swept the growth methodically, side to side, high to low. At 9:17, he noticed it. A limb stirred. No breeze, just a 20 twitch. 87 feet aloft in a banyan 240 yards off. George observed. The limb twitched once more. Then he spotted the form, a figure in dark garb nestled where three limbs joined. The enemy marksman faced east, eyeing the path where George's group hauled goods. George tweaked his optic 2 notches right for airflow. He steadied his breaths. The Winchester's release was silky, 3.5 pounds. He had tuned it endlessly at Camp Perry pre-war. Now he would test if a public target gun could end a foe skilled to strike first. George eased the release. The Winchester recoiled against his arm.
The blast echoed through the growth. 240 yards distant, the enemy marksman flinched and plummeted. He crashed through limbs. His form dropped 90 feet and struck earth by the banyan space. George cycled the mechanism. The spent shell flew out. He loaded fresh. He held his optic on the tree, alert for stirs. None. The enemy marksman's ally would be near. Enemy sharpshooters paired up, one firer, one watcher. If George had downed the firer, the watcher lurked in that tree or nearby ones. George probed the adjacent banyans. The optic's 2.5 enlargement demanded slow sweeps. Each tree might conceal several. The overhead leaves cast shades that blurred forms without close study. At 9:43, he located the second marksman, another tree 60 yards north of the initial, this one lower, perhaps 50 feet up. The enemy trooper descended the stem, retreating. He caught the blast and sensed his spot was exposed. George sighted, led the descent, fired. The second marksman tumbled rearward from the tree. His prawn rattled through limbs before him. Both struck the forest bed seconds apart. 2 blasts, 2 downfalls. George refilled his Winchester from a loader, his grip firm, his breaths even. This mirrored contests at Camp Perry, save the marks fired back. At 11:21, an enemy round hit the barrier 6 inches from George's face. The strike flung soil onto him. He shifted left and flattened against the fort wall. The round came from southwest, unlike the first pair's direction. George paused 3 minutes before edging back to his spot and scanning southwest trees. The firer would have shifted post-shot. Corps marksman rule, fire and shift, but in such thick wilds, shift choices were few. George spotted him at 11:38, third tree left in a group of 5, 73 feet up. The enemy marksman had changed limbs but stayed in the same tree, an error. George centered the hairs on the shadow and fired. The third marksman dropped, silently. By midday, George had ended 5 enemy sharpshooters. News rippled through the group. Troops who teased his posted gun now sought to observe his craft. George declined. Onlookers attracted notice. Notice attracted rounds. The enemy sharpshooters adjusted after the 5th end. They halted shifts in light. George passed the midday scanning trees, spotting 0. At 1600, he headed to Group Command. Captain Morris awaited. The scorn vanished from his tone. He desired George back at dawn. January 23rd started with downpour, thick island rain that muddied the forest bed and hid trees past 100 yards. George waited in the fort for clear skies. The downpour eased at 8:15. By 8:45, sight returned enough for action. George detected the day's first marksman at 9:12. The enemy trooper had ascended amid the rain. Clever. Rain noise hid climbs. This marksman picked a tree 290 yards distant, farther than prior. Also clever. They grasped his reach. George adjusted for range and fired. The marksman dropped. The 6th end triggered an unforeseen reply. At 9:57, enemy shells pounded near his fort. They pinpointed his spot from flash or echo. First bursts fell 40 yards shy, second 20 yards shy, third would strike true. George seized his gun and dashed. He raced north by the trees and plunged into a blast hole. As the third bursts landed, the fort he left vanished in blasts and shards. He shifted to a fresh spot. a toppled tree 120 yards north of the ruined fort. The tree gave shelter and open view of the thickets. George settled and resumed watch. The foes dispatched more marksmen that midday. They knew George hunted them. Now they hunted back. The game shifted. No more mere aiming, a contest. At 14:23, George ended his 7th marksman. At 15:41, he ended his 8th. This one perched high, 94 feet in a banyan. Strong hide, but height outlined him against the heavens as sun tilted. At 1700, Captain Morris dispatched a messenger to fetch George. George had held spot 9 hours. Morris sought counts. George stated 8 verified ends over 2 days, 12 cartridges used, 8 ends, 4 off target. Morris tasked George with ongoing sharpshooter duties from dawn, January 24th. That evening, George tended his Winchester and pondered the figures. 11 enemy sharpshooters in the Point Cruz thickets. 8 gone, 3 left. Those 3, the finest, the survivors. Now they knew his look and his gun. George filled his Winchester with 5 new cartridges and sought rest. At 300, he quit and sat with the gun on his knees. Rain resumed at 4:15. By 5:30, it poured hard, delaying dawn work. George used the delay to pick a new spot. Not the fort, not the toppled tree, a place foes would not guess. He selected 70 yards south of last, a bunch of big stones Marines used for heavy gun nest in December. The spot provided solid shelter and open view of the thickets. George settled and resumed watch. At 7:43, the rain dwindled to mist. Sight bettered. George started scanning trees. At 8:17 on January 24th, he found marksman number 9. The enemy trooper hid in a palm 190 yards out. Low, just 40 feet up. Odd, most climbed high for better views. This chose cover over height. Palm leaves made a built-in blind unseen from flat ground. But George sat raised on stones. The height let him peer into the leaves. He saw the shadow of the marksman's upper body and head. George sighted, steadied breaths, started easing the release, then paused. Something off. The spot too clear, too simple. George had pursued marksmen 3 days, ended 8. The last 3 would avoid basic slips. They would not place where a raised firer could see, unless luring. George dropped his gun and probed nearby trees. If the palm figure lured, the true threat would guard it, eyeing for shots, awaiting flash, ready to counter. George swept trees carefully, side to side, high to low. He checked all within 300 yards of the palm. 11 minutes passed. At 8:28, he found the danger. A banyan 80 yards northwest of the palm, 91 feet up. The enemy marksman nestled perfectly. Limbs and creepers hid from 3 angles. He had clear view to George's old toppled tree spot. He awaited George's show or lure shot. George faced 2 issues. First, the true marksman eyed wrong place. If George fired, sound would betray his true spot. The marksman would shift before George reloaded. Second, if George held, the marksman would note absence and hunt him. George chose to turn the lure against him. He sighted the palm decoy, tweaked for air, fired. The decoy flinched and dropped from the palm. George swiftly turned his gun to the banyan, 91 feet up. The true marksman would react to the blast. He would pivot to the noise. That pivot would stir. George saw it. A faint shift. The marksman turned to face George's spot. George centered hairs on the shadow and fired before full turn. The true marksman dropped. His gun followed. 2 blasts, 2 ends. But George exposed his spot to watchers. He grabbed gun and cartridges and dashed. He moved east by the stones and fell into a runoff channel 40 yards off. He flattened in mud and waited. At 8:34, enemy heavy fire swept the stones he left seconds before. Rounds stirred dust and rock bits. The barrage lasted 17 seconds. When quiet, George counted to 60 before shifting. He moved once more, now 100 yards east, a blast hole half full of rain. George nestled in the hole, water to his middle. He propped the Winchester on the edge and resumed tree scans. 10 verified ends, 1 left. The 11th marksman, the top, the wisest, the most seasoned. He saw 10 allies fall over 3 days. He knew George's methods. He knew George's gun. He knew George's rough area. And somewhere in those trees, he observed, waited, schemed. George probed the wilds via optic. The Lyman Alaskan zoom clarified far forms, but not certain. Each dark patch might be limb or figure. George studied each deeply. At 9:47, he grasped his error. The 11th marksman not aloft, on ground, advancing to George's spot. George caught motion at vision's edge, 60 yards south, low down, a form creeping through underbrush by the tree edge. The enemy marksman used forest floor plants for shield, greens, creepers, downed limbs. He inched toward George's known stone spot. George stayed still in the waterhole, the Winchester ready, but angle wrong. Hole edge blocked view of nearing marksman. George must rise for clear aim. Rising would show him. The enemy marksman halted at 9:52. He reached 40 yards from stones. George watched via optic. The marksman eyed stones, sought stirs, any target sign. George waited. Stillness key to marksman craft. Stay frozen, let moments flow. Await perfect chance, not rush poor aim. At 9:58, the enemy marksman crept on. Forward, 35 yards from stones, 30 yards, 25 yards. He neared from south, the path George used fleeing heavy fire. George got the plan. The enemy marksman saw the heavy attack, knew George shifted east from stones. Now he traced likely escape, hunting George as George hunted him. At 10:03, the enemy marksman hit the stones. He entered the gun nest and faced east toward the channel, toward where George ought to hide. The marksman now 38 yards from George's waterhole, but face away, back open. George had clear aim, middle body, 38 yards, simple, even sans optic. But George paused. This marksman outlasted 10 days of American pushes in Point Cruz thickets, outlived 10 others. Those fell from errors. This one, error-free. The stone spot too open, too weak. No veteran marksman lingers there beyond seconds. This must be another lure, another trap. George held optic on the stone's marksman, but widened focus to around. If lure, the true danger would shield it, placed with view to shot takers. At 10:06, George located it. Another enemy, 70 yards northwest of stones, behind down trunk. This one still, not shifting, just observing, waiting. His gun aimed at channel, where George should hide. 2 figures, not 1. The 11th marksman brought aid. Or these the last 2, number 10 and 11, teamed. George chose. He could not down both pre-reaction. The manual Winchester needed reload between blasts, gave them time to spot and counter. He needed new way. George eased deeper into water, sank till eyes and head top above. kept Winchester upright to block water and tube, then waited. At 10:13, the stone's enemy stood.
Spent 10 minutes eyeing channel, saw nothing. Thought George went farther east. Turned, signaled ally by down tree. Both advanced east side by side 70 yards separate. They swept to drive George out or find him. George stayed in water frozen. The two enemies passed his hole. Now between George and trees. Backs open. George rose from water. Quiet, slow, he shouldered Winchester. Drops fell from tube, from clothes, from skin. He aimed nearer one, the stone's figure now 42 yards off. George fired. The figure fell. George cycled, loaded, swung to second by down tree. The figure turned, lifting gun. George struck first. The second fell. 11 blasts over 3 days. 11 enemy marksmen gone. George cleared Point Cruz thickets of the danger that claimed 14 Americans in 72 hours. But as George left the hole and gathered empty shells, he heard a noise that halted him. Voices. Enemy voices from the trees. Several figures nearing the downed. George ended the marksmen, but they teamed with others. George dropped into the hole. Water, chill, murky. Sank till eyes above. Held Winchester straight to keep tube dry. Enemy voices louder. At least 6, perhaps more. They neared the 2 gone marksmen. George heard limbs snap, gear clink. Not marksmen, foot troops. A scout or body gatherers. George timed seconds. Voices halted at first body 42 yards from hole. Near enough to hear clear sans words grasp. Then voices to second body. More talk hurried. At 10:28, voices moved again, not to trees, to George's hole. They spotted his prints. Footmarks in mud from stones to hole. George careful on sound and shift, not on prints. George had 5 cartridges in Winchester, 6 enemies minimum. Weak chance for manual gun. He weighed choices. Hide, hope, bypass, or clash. Voices nearer. 30 yards, 25 yards, 20 yards. At 10:31, an enemy appeared at hole edge. Looked down straight at George. Eyes locked. George fired from water. The enemy fell back. George cycled, submerged, loaded rose. 2 more at edge. George fired, cycled, fired. Both fell. 3 cartridges left. George heard yells, more nearing. He climbed north side away from voices. Ran 20 yards, dropped by down tree. Enemy rounds cracked wilds. Bullets hit near hole, near tree. Troops fired at stirs, at noise, not sure marks. George low, scanned via optic. Saw motion. 2 advancing to hold. 50 yards out. George aimed lead 1. Fired. He fell. Second dove hide. 2 cartridges left. George heard voices rear. Enemy circling. 1 group south, another east. George near trapped. He decided. Could not win shootout with manual gun versus many auto arms. Must flee to friendly lines. George seized gun, ran north. Dashed through undergrowth. Creepers snagged boots. Limbs lashed face. Enemy rounds trailed. Bullets whizzed, hit trees, stirred soil. George ran 90 seconds. Dove another blast hole. This dry. Flattened to wall, listened. Enemy voices far. No chase. They gathered around, lost. George checked gun. Mud on frame. Drops from tube. 2 cartridges left. No loaders. Loaders in his bag. Bag near water hole. At 10:47, George moved again. Not dash, walk low terrain shield. Headed northeast to friendly edge. Wilds quiet. No voices, no stirs, just his breaths and far booms. At 11:13, George hit friendly border. A Marine guard questioned him. George named self. Guard guided through. George went to group command, reported to Captain Morris. Morris sought full account. George gave. 11 enemy marksmen ended over 4 days. 12 cartridges on marksmen. 11 strikes. Then clash with foot troops. 3 more ends. 5 cartridges total there. Morris asked ammo state. George down to 2. Morris asked gun state. George said working but needs 10. Mud in parts. Water in tube. Morris told George clean gun rest. No duties tomorrow. Group shifting east. Point Cruz thickets no longer key. Enemies leaving Guadalcanal. Report said full pullout in 2 weeks. George to his shelter. He broke down Winchester, spent 2 hours wiping each part. Preservative and lubricant. Cloths through tube till clean. Checked optic bases, tuned eye gap, loaded 5 fresh. At 1400, word from higher command. Group leader wanted George. George walked, wondering if Morris noted bad. Unsanctioned clash, high ammo use, solo sans aid. Instead found Morris and 2 officers. One Colonel Ferry, regiment head. Ferry had one query. Could George teach others his skills? George said he could attempt, but needs time, scoped guns, and troops who shoot well. Ferry said Higher had 14 Springfield guns with Ernerto optics, marksman arms Marines left. Ferry had 40 in regiment, expert shooters pre-sale. Ferry wanted George form marksman team, teach, develop methods, clear leftover enemy sharpshooters from active zones. George agreed 1 term, keep his Winchester. Ferry okayed. George retained his Winchester Model 70. The 14 Springfields with Ernerto optics to trainees. Teaching started January 27th. George gathered 40 at rough range, 2 miles east Henderson Field. Troops expert on record. Qualified basic sights to 500 yards, but none combat marksmen. None ended foes from hide. George began basics. Breath hold, release, ease wind read. Springfield guns weighed 11 pounds with Ernerto optics. Heavier than Garand, than George's Winchester. Weight steady but weary for long holds. George taught use any brace, stones, trunks, bags. Wild seldom perfect spots. Marksmen adapt land, make steady from handy items. Range work 3 days. George had them hit still marks 100 to 400 yards, then moving, then hidden by plants. By January 30th, 32 of 40 hit man size at 300 yards field style. George split to 16 pairs, firer, watcher. Watcher bore glass in Garand. Task, spot marks, guard as firer struck. Post end, swap roles. Kept both sharp, avoided sole firer risk. On February 1st, George led 4 pairs afield. Gold, clear enemy holds west Matanacao River. Reports small enemy groups lingered.
Not sharpshooters, stray foot troops not gone. 4 pairs to spots at light. George teamed Corporal Hayes watcher. They set high overlooking supply path enemies used. At 7:20, an enemy appeared on path. Hayes verified via glass. George fired. Enemy fell. George cycled, scanned more. None. Next 6 hours, George's pair struck 7 more enemies on path. 7 blasts, 6 ends, 1 off from air. Other pairs similar. 23 enemies ended that day. 0 friendly losses. The marksman team worked early February. By February 9th, team ended 74 enemies. Count low, only sure ends, body scene. Enemy pullout sped then. Ships came night to lift troops from Cape Esperance west Guadalcanal tip. American pushes west to block, but enemies held strong rears. George's team tasked end enemies shielding retreats. On February 7th, George near Tanambogo River when enemy rifle hit him. Round struck left arm. 4 spun, dropped him. Hayes pulled to shelter, called aid. Wound grave, not deadly. Round through flesh, no bone, no main flow. George to aid station near Henderson Field. Healers cleaned, stitched. Said recover but rest. No fights, 3 weeks least. George 2 weeks at station. Then enemies finished Guadalcanal leave. On February 9th, Americans hit Cape Esperance, found bare. Fight done. George's team worked 12 days. 74 shore ends, 0 friendly and marksman work. Team noted by hire. Colonel Ferry suggested George Bronze Star. But George's fight not over. In station rest, orders from Pacific High. Army needed battle vets for new task, Burma secret. George stepped up. By March, George on ship West Pacific. His Winchester Model 70 cased waterproof in hold. Lyman Alaskan optic in oil wrap. George unaware Burma details. Just knew forest fights, far scouts behind enemy. Type where far aim gun useful. Ship hit India April 3rd. George and 200 officers learned role.
Joined new force 3,000 total. No name yet. Troops called Merrill's Marauders. The 5307 composite unit named May 28, 1943, but training from April. Far reach methods, wild survive, no supply. Unit like British Chindits, small, fast, deep enemy long. George to second group. Role not marksman listed. Army no set marksman slots. George rifle unit head, but ferry note followed from Guadalcanal. Group command knew his gun skill. Training Central India. Land unlike Guadalcanal, but same heat, wet, thick, sight short. Burma worse, steep, more rain, enemy landmasters. George tweaked gear for Burma. Winchester Model 70 strong on Guadalcanal, but short work resupply. Burma long scouts, weeks, hundreds miles wild. Weight key. George swapped Lyman Alaskan for lighter Weaver 330. Weaver same 2.5 zoom, but 8 ounces less. Swapped wood frame for light made. Changes cut weight from 9 pounds 12 ounces to 8 pounds 14 ounces. Small, but on long haul, 60-pound load, ounces count. Marauders entered Burma February 1944. Goal push North Burma, take Maikinia airfield. Field key Allied China supply. Enemies held with 4,000. Marauders near overland, land enemies deemed impossible, big forces. Peaks, streams, thick, wild, no paths, few trails. Force back or mule supplies. No wheels, no big guns, just guns, tubes, fast, impossible land. George's group started March, February 24th. First week, 83 miles mountain wild. Troops fell weary. Disease rose daily. Mules hard land. Some shot, broken limbs down slopes. By March, group 217 miles. Clashed enemies 12 times. Small traps, quick shoots, fast pull. Marauders not hold land. Move, harass, cut lines, chaos, rare enemy. George used Winchester 3 times March. Once 412 yards on enemy leader guiding at river cross. Once 380 yards on heavy gun spot. Once 290 yards on marksman holding marauder scout. 3 blasts, 3 ends. George never more than 1 per clash. Winchester Echo unique unlike Garand snap. 1 blast showed him. Second let enemy spot. George learned fire shift instant. March to Maikinia 3 months. Late May, Marauders over 700 miles. Lost more sick than fight. Disease, gut fever, scrub. Unit from 3,000 to under 2,000 able. On May 17th, Marauders took Maikinia airfield. Win, but high cost. Unit broken. 2 lost, 2 ill, 2 long wild sans rest care. George lived Burma fight. His Winchester lived, but gun key on Guadalcanal used 7 times 3 months. Marauders rare, far precise aim scoped gun. Most fights close, traps 50 yards less, shoots thick, see 30 feet max. George learned in 3 Burma months. Winchester Model 70 top manual sport gun ever, but war shift. Auto guns like Garand norm. Next fight, new arms, new ways, but no next for George soon. By June 1944, left Burma with Marauders. Unit ended. George to train home. He never used Winchester battle again. George home July 1944. Army up to captain, sent Fort Benning, Georgia. Task, teach unit heads aim small group ways. He shared Guadalcanal Burma lessons, move wild, spot, farm marks, work alone, sand supply. Kept his Winchester Model 70, gun from Illinois, Tennessee, Guadalcanal, India, Burma, Georgia. End at least 14 enemies, sure perhaps more. George quit tally post Burma. Gun and chest, his rooms Fort Benning. George seldom viewed. War changed. Pacific Isles retaken 1-1. Americans push France, Germany. Needs single shooters, owned guns faded. Military standard mass make swap parts, troops same gear, same teach. George got need. Modern war industry scale. But loss. Single craft soldier way. One with right gun, right teach, alter battle. George left Army January 1947. Lieutenant Colonel, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Purple Heart, battle badge. Back Illinois, Princeton University, GI Bill. Studied policy, top honors 1950. Host Princeton, 4 years Oxford, then 4 British East Africa regional policy groups. Settled Washington, D.C., Head Institute, African American Relations. Later State Department, Foreign Institute, Advisor Teacher, Africa. George never public on Guadalcanal, Burma those years. Colleagues knew Pacific Service, but not Point Cruz. Not enemy marksman. Not Winchester Model 70 cased home. In 1947, George wrote events. Not print on note. Document arms ways, forest fight, details fresh. Wrote 6 months. Pages over 400. NRA friend read, suggested print. George hesitant. Book tech rifle ammo path details. Not public draw, but NRA urged. Book out 1947, shots fired in anger. Classic for gun fans, war scholars. Book Guadalcanal, Burma, exact, no fluff, no praise, facts observe. What worked, not combat. Book print today, reference World War II small arms. George enemy arms notes, top period accounts. George saw United States 3 more wars, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf. Saw rifles from Garand, M14, M16. Saw marksman formal role, trained deer. Saw World War II lessons retaught, refined new troops. John George passed January 3, 2009. 90 years old. Winchester Model 70 ended Guadalcanal marksman given National Firearms Museum, Fairfax, Virginia. In case, plaque history. Most pass sand stop. Looks vintage hunt gun, but not. Gun proved state aim champ, catalog optic, outshoot trained Army marksman. Gun cleared Point Cruz tickets 4 days when full group failed 2 weeks. Gun shifted American military view, single aim, modern war. If this tale touched you as us, kindly tap thumbs up. Each tale's platform share this more. Join and alert on. We pull lost tales from old files daily. Tales skilled brave rifle users. True folks, true valor. Comment now your watch spot. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. Our group spans globe. Not just watcher, part memory keep. Share spot. Share family serve. Say here. Thanks watch, thanks ensure John George stays heard. These folks merit memory, you aid that.